Hey, Richard Matthews here again, and in the last couple of videos we talked about the monetary history of the United States that's led us to where we are today, and we talked a little bit about the concept of the 7 stages of empire and why it might look like the US is currently moving into stage 7 where our monetary system would be failing. So in order to dive deeper into that point, we're going to look at the current monetary system in the US, which is called by many economists the petrodollar, and how that system works and how it's beginning to wane in importance, and how the dollar is verging on losing its reserve currency status globally. So join me on the video here as we discuss that, and then we'll start getting into what we should be doing about that in the next couple of videos.
Price, right? Because it was set at $35 an ounce to accurately reflect the amount of dollars they had printed or the new economic realities, right? But there was an inherent flaw in both of these options that made them unacceptable to the United States at the time because they both required fiscal restraint and economic responsibility. Darn. Then, as now, there was very little appetite for reducing consumption in the beleaguered name of sacrifice or responsibility. It's the same thing we're seeing now. We have no desire to actually do what would make sense, which would be reduce, the spending and reduce the, and actually put the dollar price at what it's supposed to be. We would instead rather print more dollars and do more, wars and spending and stuff.
And overall insanity.
Yeah. So why is there demand for the dollar after the gold standard was cut? So right after the gold standard was cut, that effectively erased global demand for the dollar. Right. Washington needed a new method for preserving demand for the dollar globally, and that's the solution was the petrodollar, as Fabian just said. So in 1973, the U.S. made a deal with Saudi Arabia where every barrel of oil purchased would be denominated in U.S. dollars in exchange for U.S. weapons and protection of their oil fields. And other basically military protection of what they were doing with their massive export of oil. By 1975, all of the OPEC nations had agreed to price their oil exclusively in dollars. Thus, nearly every country in the world would continue to need dollars in order to purchase the fuel that would power their own economies. And thus, global demand for the dollar was secured for the time being, even though the dollar didn't have any inherent value anymore. It had been cut from gold, right? So the other reason that there's still demand for gold other than the petrodollar is that the central banks still have it pegged as the reserve currency, despite being removed from the gold standard. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So you have anything else you want to say on the petrodollar, Fabian?
No, I mean, what I can't just said, it is so fragile right now. When you see the Middle East completely on fire, you see that basically the Saudis, in essence, it appears may start a full-blown war with Iran in this Shiite, civil war that spreads throughout the Middle East. It will fundamentally change the way of the way the petrodollar exists, and in my opinion, completely obliterate OPEC, which is one of my predictions for the global economic reset, is that OPEC will no longer cease to exist.
Absolutely. So Mike Maloney says the gold dollar standard was put in place by a series of accidental events that were very fortunate for the U.S. because it gave us a tremendous advantage over the rest of the world. And our politicians over the last few decades have basically abused this privilege like it was their birthright, causing countries all over the world to turn their backs on the dollar standard. And because all currencies in the world are tied to the dollar, this is going to cause a financial calamity, the likes of which the world has never seen. So let's talk a little bit about what's happening right now that, in the last couple of years, that are really showing the U.S. dollar is losing. It's losing I can't remember what I was going to say. Confidence all over the place. So basically, the dollar right now is 60% of the value of all currencies on the planet, and more than half of our dollars reside outside of the United States. Right. So we told you the base currency supply impacts how much your goods and services are worth. So we haven't seen massive inflation despite the massive amount of printing we've been doing, because we print all of that money and we send it elsewhere, right? We send it into the rest of the world. Eventually, that money is all going to come rushing back to the U.S., and that's going to cause horrible things. But we'll get to that in a minute. So one of the things that's happening is the BRIC nations, so Brazil, Russia, India, China, nations are now avoiding the dollar in trade. So for oil and for other things, they're doing bilateral trade agreements, which means less dollar demand. Some countries like Iran have tried not to use the dollar, right? So we banned them from doing wire transfers using the SWIFT system because Washington wouldn't want the less demand for dollars, so we banned them from doing that. Some countries, and even states like the state of Utah, and I just learned the state of Arizona also, are recognizing gold as money again, which means less dollar demand. Some countries are accumulating gold, right? Like China and Russia, because they don't trust the dollar. And some countries are repatriating their gold, like Germany and Venezuela, again, because they don't trust the dollar. So are there any other major events other than those big ones there we're covering that are basically causing the dollar to not have the demand it used to?
Absolutely. There's a few of them, actually, Richard. There's I'd say the biggest one is this new kind of World Bank that the Chinese have rolled out, the Asian Infrastructure Bank, which is going to replace the Western model of, like I said, the World Bank. And you have 42 other countries that have joined, a majority of those strong U.S. allies. So what that says to me is that the rest of the world is so clearly recognizing the day of the dollar as the world reserve currency is coming to an end. And we're not saying it's going to happen next week or next year. We don't know when, but I can guarantee you all of these countries and their economists know it's going to happen, because the history we've gone over. I mean, I think, Richard, we've gone over the history of the dollar in 10 minutes. We've gone over the history of gold. We've gone over all these things, and all these people know the same thing that we do. So it's just interesting to just see that slow progression taking place.
So eventually, collapse is coming, right?
Yeah, certainly. Eventually, certainly the collapse of the U.S. dollar and of the way the current credit system globally works is coming. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I thought this little picture was funny. It was just the U.S. economy truck falling into a pit, smashing the bottom. So, anyways, these events that we just talked about on the left side are happening faster and faster with each passing day, right? More and more countries are trying to rid themselves of their appetite for dollars. When that happens, that $50 that's in the world is all going to rush back to the United States, causing massive inflation and potentially a total collapse of the dollar, right? It will certainly lose its reserve currency status. There have been new global monetary systems put into place every 40 years or so for most of modern history, and we are basically overdue at this point for a new monetary system because those 7 stages of empire, they always happen pretty much over the course of 40 years. Anyways, Mike Maloney says when monetary systems collapse, or when the monetary system collapses, and it will, there'll be an enormous transfer of wealth depending on which side of the bet you're on. Whether you think you're making a bet or not, you are. If you're holding paper or paper-denominated assets, you're betting in one direction, and if you're holding gold, you're betting in the other direction. So which way are you going to bet, right? Fabian and I already told you which way we're going to bet. That's why you're on this webinar. So right now, I'm going to get into a note on the value of gold and why the price of gold is falling a little bit right now. But basically, gold prices always catch up in value to account for the amount of currency that a nation has created. So this is part of stage 7. It always happens when a country prints uncontrollably. In 2013, gold would have to have been worth $13,400 an ounce to account for all the dollars in existence at the time. By the end of 2015, it's projected that gold would need to be worth $26,000 an ounce in order to account for Washington's current printing rates. That's nearly 14 times the value of gold today. Actually, it's more than that. If gold's at $1,000 now, it's 26 times. But basically, if that's the case, if gold should be going up, why is the spot price of gold falling? The spot price of gold is the price of gold futures. It's paper, it's stocks, it's the electronic trading futures. It's not the price of real physical gold. This price is manipulated by massive purchases and sell-offs in the markets, right? Lowering the spot price of gold is good because it allows the manipulators to acquire more physical gold at better prices. But what happens is that the lower spot prices increased demand for real physical gold, and then supply shortages start to happen. So when that starts, physical gold becomes harder to get, and real prices diverge from spot prices. And real physical gold has diverged from spot price by as much as 200 to 400% at times just during the last decade, as spot prices drop and the supply constraints happen. Getting your hands on real physical gold becomes harder. So Fabian, I know you did some talks on this on your podcast the other day. You want to talk a little bit about what the manipulation that's happening right now that's causing the spot price to drop?
Well, I will just say 2 quick points. And, in fact, while you were just talking about this, I was looking at the article. People can go after the webinar and they can check. It's a London Telegraph article from about 7-8 months ago. And you can just Google buying gold Italian job style. And it talks about the super rich, the elite of the elite, 1% of 1%, are buying gigantic bars of gold to protect their wealth. And so these same people, which many of them are manipulators of the major financial markets, be it real estate, stocks, bonds, they are purposely manipulating the price of gold down so they can accumulate more of it. And so it's really that's one of the reasons. The other reason is that reason gold is at its lowest level in the last 5 years is because the Chinese recently came out with their reserves, claiming they only had 1,600 tons. Now, we're expecting it to be over 3,000, maybe close to 4,000 tons. But if you know anything about the way the Chinese government works, they are very deceptive, and they like to do things. They like to operate with this kind of idea of invincibility. They don't want to brag and talk about all these gold. When they eventually surpass, let's say, Germany, who's the second larger of gold in the world, if you believe the United States is number one, they don't show their gold to anyone. They want to do it quietly behind the scenes. So those are the reasons we've seen, I believe, a lot of pressure on the gold price. And really, it's why gold is really on sale right now.
Okay, so hopefully now you have a better understanding of what is going on globally and how those decisions that other countries are making have an impact on the demand for our dollar and hence the value that our dollar has, and gives you a better idea of why I'm looking to protect my assets with real money like gold. So in the next video, we're going to discuss how our monetary system works and how it's literally robbing you and I blind, and how there's some actual magic involved in our monetary system. Pretty crazy stuff. I'll see you on the next video.